Hi, Edie, and welcome to A World of Difference podcast today. It's so great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. I'm excited to be here with you today.
I'm excited too. We met each other through How Women Lead and got to be at multiple events together during the Get On Board week, especially, and then also happened to be at the same Private Directors Association meeting in San Francisco recently. And it's been really just awesome getting to know you. And so excited for this conversation today about both your career and the difference that you're making. Here on the podcast, we really like to get to know our guests a little bit better, as well as then getting into kind of the work that you do. So I guess like right off, I'd love to know a little bit about maybe some of the cultures that formed you as a person. What was it like to grow up and become who you are and then end up being the person you are today? Were there any spaces or places or cultures that formed you that you want to share with us?
That's a really great question. I had two, maybe three primary influencers in my life, and two of them are really positive, and one was not as positive. But my father was, consummate professional and leader in his field, and very involved in the leadership of his field. He was a lawyer. And I think that made a really big impression on me that it's not just about doing what you do, but you have to give back to the community that lifts you up, that helps you do what you do. And so I have had, if you will, a life of service, of being involved, leading, starting professional organizations to lift other people up. And so I think my father was a significant influence in that way. And then my very first boss, Shelley Zedek, who was a professor at UC Berkeley, is just an amazing person, brilliant, thoughtful, but also huge integrity. And he really instilled in me my professional ethic. We're both industrial organizational psychologists. I went to work for him right after I got my PhD. And, he really helped me lean in and make it okay to say, no, I won't do that because it goes against my professional standards, goes against my professional ethic. And I think he gave me backbone in that way. And then the third person, less positive, was a boss of mine when I was a consultant at Towers Perrin. And she was a really feisty salesperson and kind of almost got into a fight one time. It just left a client meeting and I'm driving down the freeway, 70 miles an hour, probably too fast. And she's berating me because I didn't ask for the sale and I didn't go for the jugular and I got to be a salesperson like her. And I just realized that that's not who I am. And that's not, I consult to people in the human resource management space, but I'm very passionate about the work that I do. And I only want to do work that I'm really passionate about. And if it's not something that somebody wants to engage in, that's okay. I'm there to solve my clients' business problems. And I don't think I have to ask for the business. And I realize that's very different from most consultants, but I like to develop relationships with people and I just want to make a difference. And if they think I'm the person, then that's great. And I just realized that being authentic to who I am and being okay with that, I don't have to be somebody else's style. And that made a really big impression on me. It was not positive at the moment. I almost kicked her out of my car going 70 miles an hour. But it really helped me look inward and think about the professional that I wanted to be.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. My experience of being around you is that you are the kind of person who is a relationship builder. And it's actually really refreshing to hear. We all have hard experiences in our work lives and different levels. We've worked with people that, we didn't see eye to eye with, or even people where our ethics were challenged. And those are moments of leadership. Are you going to stay true to who you are and your values? I actually have a values exercise I went through years ago with a coach, and I keep a little stack of my values here on my desk to remind me, because it's often hard. We make these little decisions all the time. Am I going to stay true to who I am? And in a world where, especially business, you're often thinking 10x and these things, right? And at the end of the day, we're people, we're humans. And so your side of business really gives you a chance to kind of focus on that. You're focusing on an industry, on an organization, but all organizations are made up of people, of humans. So, in addition to kind of those stories that you told, what else inspired you to pursue this kind of, the career that you're in industrial organizational psychology? How did that lead you to focus on sort of talent management and future work and all those kind of things?
Well, so growing up, I always wanted to be a psychologist. I don't know why. Nobody in my family was ever a psychologist, so this was just me. And it's probably, as you identified, kind of the I enjoy being with people and I enjoy helping people. And so, of course, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. And then I really realized that clinical psychology was not what I wanted to do. But I always had this innate business sense. And I really was fascinated by business and people and organizations. And then one day when I was, I think, a sophomore in college, a classmate of mine told me about industrial organizational psychology. And it just it all clicked, right? It was industrial organizational psychology, is essentially the psychology of work behavior. And when you think about kind of your values, what you were talking about, what is my purpose? What is my purpose in the work that I do? I am totally driven on helping individuals and organizations succeed, and not one at the cost of the other. That I fundamentally want to help individuals achieve all that they can in their career and be happy and fulfilled. And we spend so much of our time at work. It is so important that experience enriches our life. And so I'm really driven to create that experience for people. But that experience has to also help drive organizational productivity. Because at the end of the day, the difference that I want to make is helping a company to be more successful through individual success. And it just all kind of comes together in being able to work both those ends of the processes of any kind of talent management process is really about individuals and their careers and putting the right people in the right place and helping them be as successful as they can be. So nice marriage for me. The future of work issue started with me in about 2014. So almost 10 years ago now. It actually was 10 years ago. Several of my colleagues were having conversations about HR, we should be better than we are today, right? And, how are we perceived in organizations? And obviously a lot has changed since the pandemic and kind of what organizations are going through. And I think HR has really gotten a lot more respect in the last 4 years compared to where we were 10 years ago. But we really saw an opportunity for HR to fundamentally shift and change because the nature of work was changing. And if we weren't leading that change, other disciplines were going to essentially eat our lunch. And so I got involved in a huge collaboration with a bunch of amazing leaders, mostly chief HR officers, some academics, some other consultants such as myself, in really working through what does the future of work look like? How does HR need to change as a consequence of that? And how do our talent processes need to change to meet where work is going? And that work led me to collaborate with somebody who worked on the CREATE project with me. And that was Kelly Stephen Weiss, who at that time was the chief HR officer for Here Technologies. And we created the very first internal talent marketplace that would allow companies to match individuals to project-based opportunities based on the skills that they had or opportunities for learning. and growth. And why it was important for her company is skill sets were changing really quickly in the company, and they needed a way to upskill people in the flow of work. And also, the business climate was changing, and business priority today was not the same as the business priority tomorrow. So they needed to become more agile as an organization and be able to shift talent to their most pressing business priority. And that gave birth to, if you're seeing this in video, the book behind me called The Inside Gig, which is really about how companies can unleash the capacity of talent inside by allowing people to flow to project-based opportunities based on their own personal interests. And this is a concept that we have seen really kind of take off in a number of companies, but also the ROI of engaging in this new talent strategy is astronomical for companies. So companies are saving billions of dollars in a year. Maybe it's millions of dollars in a year, by better optimizing the talent that they have within their organization. It excites me to be able to, work with somebody who was so aligned on a philosophy about changing the way we work, to implement that in a company, to see the amazing impact that it had within her organization, and then to start to see other companies adopt this new talent strategy. And of course, this is kind of what started the skills-based revolution in human resources.
Which is still going, which is still very, very, I mean, I work in talent development. We've had some conversations, right? And, skills based is just, if anything, increasing, right? And so, as you mentioned, the ROI is really clear. If somebody's listening and this is new for them, or maybe they're new into HR, or maybe they're in like a biz ops role and they're having to rely on somebody else to do this work, help people understand a little more specifically, like maybe some stories about how you've really seen this impact organizations by promoting internally instead of always looking outside, and by giving new skills to their own workforce.
So two stories that quickly come to mind, and we tell both of them in the book. The first is Cisco Systems, kind of a big company a lot of people have heard of. When they were going through a transition from a server-based company to a cloud-based company, they knew that they needed different talent than they had. And so they looked out into the labor market data. And they knew that there were not people in the numbers that they needed to execute on this business strategy. So they realized they were going to have to develop their own people. So people were going to be, I was on a webinar the other day talking about, sunset careers and sunrise careers. People who were in the server-based business, their careers were going to be sunsetting. And people who were leaning into this cloud-based technology world their sun was rising. And they gave them an opportunity to opt into projects in this new cloud-based world, the Internet of Things, to build the skills and capabilities that they needed for the future of work at Cisco. And by doing so, they were able to develop the talent that they needed within their own company. And there are all kinds of statistics on the amount of money a company can save by simply upskilling their current talent versus letting people go and then trying to hire in new people, because our path to productivity isn't, it takes a while before you learn the company, and there's systems and the people and who to go to and where all the information is. So it's a very compelling strategy. So that's story number one. Story number two was at Here Technologies, where we incubated this idea. In the first year of executing this new talent marketplace strategy, they were able to save, and it's million, not billion, $14 million by leveraging the talent that they had versus hiring contractors or new employees to do projects that they needed to get done within the business. And they calculated that based on how people were opting into projects. And if you were working on a project outside of your P&L, they counted that as a savings. So people were still doing their day jobs, but this was work that they were doing because they were passionate, they were interested, they had skills that they weren't using in their current job that they wanted to use, or they wanted to learn something new. And employee engagement went up by 9% in that first year. And if you know anything about the employee engagement research, we know that when you increase employee engagement, you increase organizational productivity. And what was fascinating for me, I think actually the most interesting part, was that when people were opting into projects on this platform, you were ending up with multidisciplinary teams. So people from different parts of the business ended up working together to solve a problem. And this is really great because today our problems are pretty complex and we often need people with different skill sets to solve those problems. We'll start to think about the business acumen that gets built when we put together this diverse talent who gets to learn about how things work in different parts of the business. Think about the relationships that get built that then smooth future project-based opportunities, because I know a guy, I know a gal who can help with that, or I know the person who has that kind of information. And you start to think about what a rich organization you build when you allow people to get out of their silos and contribute to projects based on their skills and their interests.
Yeah.
So really powerful stories.
Yeah, so powerful. I think, employee engagement is something that is really, especially during the COVID pandemic and even coming out of it here in Silicon Valley, there's been no shortage of ink spilled over how to increase that. And, it certainly resonates with a lot of the research I've been reading and just the practical, how it works out, in my current business where I'm over our global talent development, that if people have skills they're not using, and suddenly you offer them an opportunity to use it and it's something they're passionate about, it really does sort of awaken something in someone that's sort of been lying there dormant, waiting to be used. And on a psychological level, that feels really good that you've been able to help the business in a different way. I'm wondering, in light of all of that, because another issue we see happening quite a bit is there's burnout happening a lot in businesses in light of a lot of these shifts. We have, AI coming now into our lives at work, and there's research being done even now on, is AI making us, better or worse for all the, not just ethical reasons, but when it comes to, are we expected to do more at work now, or is this actually taking off some of the load? So when you're balancing getting new, assignments, it's exciting to use new skills, typically compensated extra for that extra work. In your perspective, is it too much even if they are compensated? I guess some of those questions around burnout are still being looked at. I would love your perspective on all of that from what you've seen.
Yeah, so I want to answer that from a couple different perspectives. One is that we know that when people are working on things that they're passionate about, we get into a sense of flow. We're much more highly productive because we're just immersed in a problem and we lose all sense of all track of time. Everybody who's listening to this has had that kind of experience, like, oh my goodness, where did the time go? That was so great. That was such a fun experience. So employees are feeling burnout. There's a lot of, perhaps people are overwhelmed with work that they have to do, but some of it is they're not as deeply engaged in the work that they're doing. So if you let people choose work that is inherently of interest to them, you light a spark that actually creates more energy. So that's one way of answering it. I will tell you that most companies that implement that talent strategy do it for development purposes, and it's generally on top of somebody's day job. That, however, is not what I recommend, and it's not what we talk about in the Inside Gig. We talk about optimizing talent within an organization. We think that employees should work with their managers to have conversations about where they can add the most value and what work that they're doing burns them out, depletes them. It's maybe something I could do in my sleep and I'm not really getting much out of it and it's just taking a lot of time. What are those meetings that you're in that you don't really need to attend, but you go to out of habit? And I suggest, now this is one way in which AI can actually help you. AI, you can read the notes. You don't have to go to the meeting unless you're an intimate part of the discussion in that meeting. But if you're going there for information, this is a great way to save an hour in your day by not going to that meeting and just reading the summary. I do this all the time, but also kind of understanding what work maybe should shift to somebody else. Perhaps it's a really great learning opportunity for somebody else. Maybe it's work that drains you, that's not really your skill set, that you struggle through, but you have to do it because it's kind of part of your job. But if somebody who really enjoys that work could do that work and lift that burden from you, you could focus more of your energy where you add more value. So I really talk about deconstructing the work that you do. What work can be automated? Where can we use AI to help us do work more efficiently? What work maybe should you not be doing anymore? You do it out of routine. What work might be a great learning project for somebody else and frees you up to do something where you would be more engaged or help you learn something new or broaden your career? So this idea of deconstructing our roles and looking at where we add the most value, what work we love. The term often is called job crafting, help us to really understand how to get the most and how to bring our full selves to work in a way that lights us up instead of burns us out.
I love that. So helpful. I love one of the things I use as a manager of my team that's global is something from Marcus Buckingham, and you may have seen it before, but it's along the lines. He talks about red threads and how his research shows that in terms of you don't have to love everything about the work that you do, but if you love at least like 20% of it, then that's actually surprisingly, it's going to help you tremendously to be able to do your job really well. And it's these red threads that he talks about. And so he has these questions. I heard him speak one time and he talked about it. And I use this in my one-on-ones with all my direct reports when I meet with them weekly. And it's what are you loving right now? What are you loathing? And then how can I help or resource you? And so every week I get to learn. And I've shifted things around on our team where it's like somebody on the team will mention, I really don't love this, and like documentation. And then somebody else on the team is like, I love documentation. So I've shifted things because every week I get to learn more about, we're getting new projects often, right, in our business. And so it's just extremely helpful to keep on track of that. And it's something I've trained our managers on as well in our company. It's I really love it. There's some little tips and tricks based out of these kinds of research projects that people have done that can really help managers. Another thing I wanted to touch on with you is you've spent some of your work on just helping as a thought leader to approach people in our work cultures that may be overlooked or not resourced well enough to get certain roles. Tell us about that work and what kind of difference you're hoping to make through that in the workplace and for people to understand maybe some resources that could help them to do this kind of work too.
Yeah. So that is not work that I directly do. However, I am the chair of the board of the SHRM Foundation. SHRM stands for the Society for Human Resource Management. They're the largest professional HR association in the world. They have about 340,000 members who touch about 365 million employees' lives every day. So pretty big impact of the people who are touched by the SHRM organization, and I am the chair of the board of the SHRM Foundation. Our work is to mobilize and equip HR to be a positive force for social change, how to help all workers and workplaces prosper and thrive. And one of the particular pillars of the work we focus on mental health and wellness and burnout and all the issues that you were just discussing. But one of our key pillars, kind of widening pathways to talent, focuses on how do we help companies access the talent that they need, and how do we help individuals who are often disenfranchised from the workplace gain access to good jobs. So perhaps it's people who have been previously incarcerated, older workers, military veterans, people with disabilities, people who have a hard time being given that chance to show how they can show up and thrive in the workplace. And the SHRM Foundation has tons of research to support organizations and help them to understand how to tap into these pools. Another part of that work stream is skills first hiring. Only, I think there are 62% of Americans do not have a 4-year college degree, but most hiring systems from big companies screen for people with a 4-year college degree. So here we are having a hard time hiring the people that we need to fill our roles, and we're just automatically shutting out 62% of the population, which is crazy. And skills are changing so quickly in the workplace. What we're finding is that people with certifications, digital credentials, can go through boot camps where they're learning the skills that are so critical to supporting our organizations going forward. But you don't have to have a 4-year college degree to get there, because a lot of people can't afford a 4-year college degree. College has gotten very expensive. And while many people can access financial help, a lot of people can't. And I'm really proud of the work that we do in helping people gain access to good jobs that lift them up, helping employers understand there's a broader pool of talent out there that you are reflexively not embracing and going after, that actually can be very loyal, very great long-term employees, and helping them to understand kind of how to tap into that pool. Another pool is what we call opportunity youth, which is people who are 16 to 25 and they're neither working nor in school. And so finding ways to create employment opportunities for these individuals that help lift them up and create a whole new future for them. I think the work of the foundation is incredibly inspiring. People who are interested in learning how their company can tap into that information, you can go to the SHRM Foundation, and we have free resources that are available to people. We also have scholarships for people who want to learn to become an HR professional and perhaps have some financial challenges to help them do that. So we also have those kind of scholarship opportunities. It's a really amazing organization that is just trying to leverage HR to be a force for positive social change. How can you not like that?
I know. It's amazing. It's so great. It's just very inspiring. I think that I may have said this to you before, but I spent a lot of my early career in nonprofit, and kind of grew up in international school, and a lot of my classmates, their dads were presidents of multinational companies, and it was in the 80s and 90s where a lot of us were talking about global impact, geopolitical events that cause climate change and all of these, and you start to see that business can really harm in a lot of ways. But it was somewhere along the way that I realized, the only way to make a difference isn't through nonprofit. So I'm still, like I sit on a nonprofit board. I believe that work is amazing, but also there are opportunities in business to make the world a better place. And I think one of the core places for that to happen is in an area of like talent development or human resources, where you get to kind of speak into some of the ethics around how we treat people. And there's a way to work and there's a way to work. And there's, I think, this younger generation, although we're seeing some, you know cross very much like cross cultural communication, very cross generational communication, the way that boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha coming up, the way they view work is drastically different in some ways, and how we come together in a workplace really matters. How have you seen some of those shifts, and what are you advising people on when you've seen those types of events occur, in workplaces?
For one, I just have to say, I am so hopeful about these younger generations because their sense of doing good and doing right um, is so deeply instilled in them. I mean, they're willing to forego, making money, to do the right thing. Um, so I'm just very hopeful about what our future could be. These are people who, uh, grew up with a very multicultural world around them. They don't see skin color the way that I'm a boomer, the way boomers, just the world has become this huge melting pot, and it's very, very different in how they operate and they see the world. So I think it's really important that we listen to one another. This came up in a meeting that I was in the other night about there's a lot of I can't wait to get there by the younger generation of when's my promotion to become vice president? I've been on the job for an hour. And so there's some unrealistic expectations, but I think embracing the way in which employees want to be engaged and they want to be heard. Story in OD and all of the kind of listening opportunities that we have with employees through surveys, focus groups, really truly understanding the employee experience from their perspective, how they want to be involved, engaged. I think it's important that we understand that perspective. They have something to give. They grew up in a world that was digital where we didn't. So they're, digital natives. I think COVID has been a horrible experience from a career perspective for a lot of people who didn't have a lot of the socialization that traditionally people had. At the same time, I think hybrid's the way to go because people learn to blend their work and personal lives in a much more fluid manner when we have hybrid work opportunities. I'm hearing so much, and that's another issue that the SHRM Foundation is getting involved in caregiving. This is a huge issue where a sandwich generation of people, probably Lori, such as yourself, who are both caring for children and caring for their parents, and the stress that and the burden that puts on the productivity of an organization because you can only be in so many places at one time. So there are issues that we need to pay attention to, and we need to listen to all the voices of our employees, the older employees who are part of that sandwich generation who are experiencing the stress of caregiving, younger employees who want to work and do things differently, but they also need and want to be mentored. And if all the senior people don't want to come into the office because they want to work remotely, we need to create experiences that create community and connection that allow those younger employees to have the kind of mentoring relationships that will facilitate their careers. So we can't just look at what's going on in our business ecosystem through our own lens. We have to understand what the experience is like for other people and what they need. Did that make sense?
Absolutely. No, that's very, very exciting. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there. I agree with you. I'm very hopeful about the younger generation. I love their fire, their tech savvy in ways that we absolutely need. And they stand up for things they care about. And that's a really incredible combination. I'm very excited. I hope we see more workforces mentoring them, and we find ways to make that happen. However, it is that works for everyone. Because I just, I fully believe in the power of mentorship. I'm a recipient and a giver in that space. I've been for years, and it truly is remarkable in so many ways. We, like I mentioned in the beginning, we met through How Women Lead and are involved in Get On Board Week. And I'd love to hear your thoughts more around how women on corporate boards really could make a difference in both some of the ethical things we've spoken about, welcoming in the younger generation and our insights related to that, everything from that to, how organizations should run in light of sandwich generation dynamics and all of that. How can women on corporate boards really benefit business and society as a whole in your perspective?
So, women can contribute to corporate boards just like men do. I mean, obviously, based on the experience that they bring to the conversation in the boardroom. Personally, I'm seeking a board seat because I believe that my experience in culture, in talent, are some of the hugest risk issues for organizations today. And I can add a lot of value with that particular perspective. But just as people with different life experiences and people from different disciplines, people from different genders, they just bring a different lens about how we look at issues, how we might handle issues. And having that diversity of thought in the boardroom, I find to be very, very important. I'm, very interesting. I'm the chairperson of a board that is largely female because it's in the human resources space, though we work very hard at having our male colleagues, but we're also really diverse from a demographic perspective. And I love the voices that these different experiences bring to the organization and to our decision making about, have you considered this? Or, in my life experience, when you can bring those, not only their discipline expertise, but how they perceive the world, it just enriches our conversations. So if we are a monolith, obviously in the boardroom, it kind of sounds like all old white males. Nothing wrong with those brilliant people who've had, truly distinguished careers, but they tend to see the world through a very similar lens. And our business problems are complex, and they involve the feelings of people who are different from us. So recently, we've seen a huge interest by employees of their companies taking a particular stake, taking a stance on some kind of political issue. I'm not necessarily saying who will you vote for, but should your employees have right to an abortion, for example? What kind of healthcare access do you provide within your own organization? And if you're a global organization, or if you are an organization in multiple states, what do you do if you want to provide that kind of access to your employees, but you have some employees who live in states where that's not legal? Then what will you do? This became a huge issue for my colleagues who were chief HR officers, who had to develop their benefit policies in light of what was happening in the world around them. Or when the George Floyd murder happened, and the uprising around, how does the world see and treat people differently? what is an organization's perspective and position on race in the workplace, the whole Me Too movement. So all these issues came up, and companies had to step into their values. We weren't asking them to make political statements. We were asking them to make statements about the values that they hold true in their company and how that lives through some of these issues. It's been very challenging. And in the boardroom is where a lot of those decisions about whether or not a company will come out and take a position, because let's face it, all your customers aren't going to like that position. And where are you willing to make a statement and where aren't you? Where we've seen this done really, really well is when a company sticks to its core values and how it lives their policies through those values. But that requires a conversation in the room of different perspectives. And I think having women in the room certainly helps provide a level of empathy, which is a skill that is more innate to women, that I'm not saying men don't have that by any means, but there are some leadership skills that are more inherent in our female leaders. They're not all like that, but it can really help bring light to a conversation that wouldn't happen if there wasn't a woman in the room. And for that reason, I do think that having diversity on the board, diversity is around mindset and experience that helps us make better decisions. And so we're not trying to hire less qualified people. There are plenty of qualified women out there. But I think companies make better decisions when they have more voices around the room.
Absolutely. That's the point of our podcast. So thanks for that promo. And thanks for the work that you do. It's been so great talking to you and hearing your perspective and all of your knowledge and just the research that you've done, what you've written about, who you're around, and the voices you're listening to, and just the wealth of knowledge that you bring to this conversation. I've learned so much from you. I'm inspired by the work that you do. I'm really encouraged for what this means for us in business and for all of us who buy products and consume whatever businesses are providing around the world. To think of having diversity on those boards, thinking of us as consumers is also really important. And so thank you for just the spirit of inclusion that you bring to this conversation. I am going to ask you to hang out for our difference makers. So all of you listening, you can go to patreon.com/a world of difference, and you'll hear this rest of the conversation there. But for this conversation, thank you so much, Edie, for being on the show today. I really appreciate you and all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you, Lori. I'm so glad to have you as part of my tribe now, and I really enjoyed this conversation.